Hi to everybody at the LRB tonight, Thursday. This is Paul Mason. I won't be there, I'm sorry, I'm in Barcelona. Congratulations to the authors of The Oil Road, and here's my two penneth about some of the issues raised. I was asked to talk specifically about the background, the economic background. I want to really make 4 points. The first point is, I think the environmental movement has been slightly for the last year or two fighting the last war, in the sense of, I remember being told by environmental campaigners that if you could stop Canadian tar sands, that was the final frontier for the expansion of oil extraction, and then if you stopped it, it would force companies and above all governments to face more truthfully the problems of sustainability and climate change and energy depletion, and basically they'd accept peak oil as a prognosis, and they'd start to adapt. Capitalism would start to adapt much faster than it normally would. Well, the tar sands have been opened up, albeit with all the costs environmentally and the economic cost. It's not highly efficient. So that didn't happen, and then you suddenly got fracking. You've got shale gas. Now, the advocates of shale gas are very bullish about what it's going to do to US energy, the mix of US energy. First, that it will make the United States more rapidly self-sufficient in energy, and second, that it is going to cheapen the cost of energy. Now, you can spend your time disputing that, and you can spend your time opposing it, but if it happens, it's going to have a massive change. First of all, it will slow the process of adapting to climate change and energy depletion, and secondly, it will probably change America's geopolitical focus. We know that since Cheney, they've been trying to achieve self-sufficiency in energy so that eventually they can take or leave conflicts in the Middle East. But at the moment, they're still takers for conflicts in the Middle East. That might change long term. So the second problem is shale gas tanks the entire plans of Vladimir Putin, because it basically alters the dynamics of dependency in all of Russia's export markets. That's why, above all, in Eastern Europe, while Germany and France have banned fracking, you've got Eastern Europe really going quite rapidly down the route of shale gas, because they see it as a insurance policy against further geopolitical moves using gas by Putin. So, and that's all happening right now. It's massive and it's rapid, and I think it does change things, and you ought to debate them. The second thing is about the recovery that we're in, the economic situation. Well, the economic situation is still quite bad, because the fundamental problem arising out of the credit crunch that began in 2007-8 is that we are in a balance sheet recession, in which countries, companies, individuals who have overborrowed are going to take the best part of a decade to pay down that borrowing. And so whatever you do to stimulate demand, fiscal policy, and even these massive monetary injections we see through quantitative easing, don't actually stimulate the recovery. Now, a 10-year stagnation for the West, on top of the 10 years of Japan, is going to more rapidly than we expected, alter the balance of economic power in the world. By 2030, 2/3 of the growth in the world is going to be coming from outside Japan, America, and Europe, outside the big three. That's a totally new situation in the world, and it will have big impacts on the dynamics of consumption and of production and of flow of energy markets. The third thing is, what's the long-term prognosis for capitalism? Well, I have always believed in the predictive power actually, of Kondratiev long cycle theory. I think we are technically at the start of a long upswing driven by technology, IT, comms, trickling over into real industries, manufacturing, the 3D printing revolution, etc. That gives capitalism a sort of plus point. It should be recovering, because the day of reckoning was delayed by about 10 years, using loose monetary policy to prevent a crash at the end of the 90s. As when you take echinacea and you've got a cold, the cold you eventually get, I think, always becomes worse. We've got a worse depression and a longer depression than the one that would naturally have occurred. But capitalism should start to recover from that towards the end of the 2010s decade, I think. The question then is the recovery process, because so much money has been spent during the palliation process, these years, the last 4 years, on monetary stimulus. When everybody withdraws from monetary stimulus, I would expect that, i.e., everybody, the central bank starts to sell the bonds. I would expect that, and this won't occur in Europe's case for many a year, to really stimulate more of a tendency towards protectionism and economic competition in the world through currencies, through trade, than we've seen at all in the modern period. Now, if that were to coincide with a struggle contingent on changing energy demand, I think that would be quite a big issue. The third thing is, I think climate change and the underlying depletion of the traditional sources of energy are big negatives on this wave, the 50 years ahead for capitalism, and I think it's touch and go whether or not it survives them. It's not a popular view, but I would say it's quite likely that we have cataclysmic crises in the next 10 to 15 years that actually fracture some of the power structures of states. States that can't get their head around what to do about these twin problems of energy depletion and economic stagnation are going to start fragmenting. We see it in Greece, we see it in Spain, the beginnings of it in the last month, but America, Russia, possibly China, are going to all have to bite the bullet of what kind of states they want to be. Finally, because I know you're obsessed with it, the dynamics of protest. I think we're going to see, look, protests around environmentalism, around sustainability, around energy come and go. And they've come. There is no abatement of concern around this in the world. But I would be looking to see the point at which traditional social democracy or liberalism, radical movements, so-called, in the developed world, begin to reprioritize environmental and energy issues and population issues above the traditional short-term economic issues. I think we're going to see that in politics. I think we're seeing just the beginnings. The challenge of green movements and green parties to social democracy is quite obvious at the moment. In Europe, it's very acute, this problem of what should the left do. What should social democracy do to avoid fragmenting and avoid having to do the worst of austerity under its own name? But the longer term issue is you're not going to get a holistic answer to a reshaping of capitalism project in the 21st century until you decide what the priorities of energy, climate, sustainability and economics are. And I think this meeting, this book, is part of the debate about that. The final thing I'll throw in is don't be too one-sided, one way about the power of oil majors. Oil majors are absolutely powerful. Yes, they have recarved up the world and in many senses dominated the interests of governments. But the more governments become aware that there are other key resources in the world, then one would expect companies aligned to those resources or forces aligned to those resources to start being equally powerful. Now, one of them is metallurgy, which is one of my obsessions, the rare earth situation. But another one is expertise in green technology. And I don't think it's beyond the realms of imagination that companies that exhibit expertise in green technology, including the extraction of the remaining hydrocarbons in the Earth's core, in the Earth's crust, those companies probably have a lot to play for. So, in summary, shale gas is going to change the game. The economic crisis is going to reshape the world. It's touch and go whether technology and innovation prove more powerful forces than the negative forces of this long drag of high debt and this problem of the collision of economics with, as it were, ecosphere problems. And finally, activism probably is going to, whether you want it to or not, but is going to evolve towards more holistic approaches, whether we call them parties anymore and political programs. But I think projects are going to emerge that work out ways to make governments and states take seriously, in a strategic sense, this combination of energy, economics, social cohesion and social justice. If I was to describe a social democracy for the 21st century, its agenda would be that, and in that order. Have a great rest of the book launch, and a glass of warm wine and a bit of cheese for me.